Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and Archain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, Archain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
So welcome to this week's climate coordination call. I have a couple of pieces of news that I wanted to share, and then Daryl is going to take it over and talk about some very interesting and important things that we've planned on. So I'm just going to start now. I'm going to just share. This is a bit of a shocker, but I thought it would be really important to share this, so I'm putting it in the chat. Apparently, scientists have estimated that probably now it's over this number, but they said 500 million, so half of a billion animals have been killed in the Australian bushfires. And that was almost a week ago now, so probably the number has gone up. But I just wanted to draw a little bit of attention to what is going on down there. The military is evacuating people, thousands of people, and just the scale of this disaster down there is so insane. I don't know if we've ever seen anything quite like this before, especially just given the area of Australia, which is massive, and sometimes on a map you can't really tell because it's so far below the equator. But anyway, this is a really devastating article, and it's been making its way around climate Twitter and other places, and I just thought I would share it because a lot of people have not really fully grasped the disaster that is happening down there. So I wanted to share that, but there's also some good news because we can't just only have bad news. I'll share this link as well, and this is a very exciting story about here, I just put it in the chat there, about blockchain technology being used to geotag trees and other things to fight deforestation in Africa. And this is a very interesting project. I just found out about this because they just posted it on Christmas Eve. But every time I look, there is a new blockchain startup or a blockchain project that is trying to help save the environment. And I think it's a really exciting and interesting idea. But basically, they're trying to plant more trees, and they're trying to verify that these trees are being planted. And they're also trying to support this new initiative, which is going to be launched in February 2020, which is called Building the Great Green Wall, which is basically about sort of re-greening, rewilding Africa. They want to but they want to plant their way across Africa. And this initiative, I think, has been planned for a long time by the United Nations. But anyway, this startup is trying to help with that. So anyway, there's two little pieces of news, one quite bad, but one actually very interesting. So that's what I have today. I don't know if you guys got a chance to check out either of these articles, but I know that Daryl has some interesting commentary prepared as well. So that's what I have right now.
Well, I just want to point out that with all of these regreening efforts, I really appreciate them. And I also have concerns. The thing that we're losing is diversity. Right. So if you lose like 1,000 different species of trees and you plant one species of tree to replace them, that's not good.
Well, yeah, that's true. And also there have been studies showing that actually the age of the forest has a lot to do with how much carbon it can store. So even if we were able to plant all the trees that we wanted to plant, they're younger trees, obviously, even if you transplant them from somewhere else, and you lose the ecosystem, and you also lose a lot of the moss and other things that hold the carbon, which is really important. So,
Right. The
but no,
mycelial layer in particular is really important for carbon sequestration and carbon management.
right.
So if you just plant one species of tree and you're not cognizant, or one is not cognizant of the whole interplay of species, and in particular sort of these other networks that we're only just learning about, that's where I have real concerns, and that's why I have serious concerns about the Amazon.
Yeah, well, and also the Congo as well is another one that's very concerning, and also burning. But I think most of these efforts probably realize that, and they're probably trying to plant, I would hope, more than one type of tree, but I could look into it and see exactly what they're planning to plant. And hopefully also that the natural diversity of neighboring areas can over time can sort of regrow itself into these other areas where at least there are trees and plants, and even if it's not as diverse as it was before, it gives a possibility for the diversity to continue to spread and recover. Hopefully, I think is maybe part of the idea, but I'm going to look into this more and see what exactly they're planning to plant. So that's very important. But Daryl, did you want to say something about this?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like, it's the geoengineering project is a lot more complicated than just like planting one species of tree. I know what you're saying, Greg. Like, and really, like, we have to look for answers in all fronts. I share your concern about the Amazon being a more important one. I think, not destroying the ecosystems that are already there is like priority number one. But what I was going to talk about today, I guess it revolves around an article that I kind of discovered on the 31st, and it was in Forbes magazine. And the title of the article is, "This is why December 31st is the cosmic calendar's most important date." So I remember as a young tween loving the show Cosmos with Carl Sagan. And I recall him talking about the 13.8 billion years ago when the Big Bang happened and the universe was first born. And I used to love the cheesy graphics. And there was one I recall where, he's on this giant calendar and he's walking around on this giant calendar. And the calendar is like a year in the life of the universe. And it's an attempt to kind of just show the scope of how old 13.8 billion years is, and how, and what a speck of tiny little dust we are at the very end of this cosmic calendar. So it wasn't until approximately 11:48 p.m. on December 31st of the cosmic calendar, or about 300,000 years ago in actual time, that autonomically modern humans rose for the first time. And this gave me a good understanding of the precious conditions within the vastness of time-space that led to the profoundly remote possibility of our existence as a sentient being on a giant spinning ball revolving around an energy source. And the Forbes article concludes to say the following, and I quote, "All that human beings have ever accomplished occurs in a cosmic blink of an eye. Our progress over the past few thousand years may have been rapid and incredible, and has brought us to a point where we now seek to extend our civilization beyond Earth. We have come so far in such a short time, cosmically speaking, but whether we'll endure remains to be seen. if we truly want to make any significant dent into year 2 of the cosmic calendar, we have our work cut out for us. The world is changing rapidly, and on many fronts, we continue to damage and poison the ecosystem that sustains us. If we don't begin taking a longer-term view of our civilization, we could be gone in mere cosmic seconds, just as all of recorded human history fits into mere seconds as well. As the 2010s give away to the 2020s, it's up to all of us to pilot our one and only habitable planet, Earth, in the right direction. So not only are we a tiny speck in the universe of space-time, we appear to be living in conditions that are so precarious that with all the stars and galaxy that we can observe, we've yet to find another similarly inhabitable planet. There's a fairly tender balance of temperature, water, energy, nutrients, and atmosphere that allows for life to exist. The variables are vastly complex to create a planet such as ours. The odds of creating conditions for life on Earth are astronomically high. Life is truly precious and rare. And we now know that humans are creating an impact on our atmosphere that will have an effect on the planet that can make it uninhabitable in another blink of the cosmic calendar, unless we do something. So what the father of climate science, James Hansen, realized was that of CO2 and how vital it is that the levels are just right, balanced with the other elements. And here's an analogy that explains it well. It's kind of when I first fully understood it, when I kind of heard this analogy. So if you picture a bathtub with an open drain at the bottom and no drain at the top, the bathtub is full to the brim with water. So the water coming out of the tap has been carefully adjusted to match the level of drainage at the bottom, creating an equilibrium of flow. The water represents CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, let's say that we increase the tap pressure even by the tiniest amount. Over time, the bathtub will start to overflow and this tender equilibrium is broken. And that's the problem we're facing today. Industrialized society has increased that tap amount, and even though the amount is tiny compared to the planetary levels of CO2, it's enough to upset the tender balance that created this precious conditions for life so incredibly rare in our universe. So what do we have to do? This is our big challenge as a species. We love to take pride in ourselves with our superior intelligence, with unique awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. Yet so far we've been incapable of working together as a planetarily aware species. The big challenge for us in our lifetimes is to evolve to this stage in our progression, where we awaken as a self-aware global civilization. I have a bunch more to talk about here, but maybe I'll just stop right now and just, say, like, to me, this is why I'm here for Archon, because to me, Archon represents that. It represents the possibility for the next stage of the internet. The internet to me, the internet is a miracle. It was born from a military exercise, and the whole idea of it was to root around obstacles so that it was resilient and it could expand. And now we're at this point now where we can now create the next stage of what the internet could be. And to me, it's happening just at the right time for us to develop this global coordination system as a species. So I guess I'll just stop there and see where everybody's head's at with this.
Well, thank you very much for putting it in stark terms, I think understandable terms. This is what I've been trying to talk about. And I'm really delighted that other people are finding a language for it. I'll go a step further, which is to say that I view coordination technologies like the blockchain as kind of building the nervous system, but not the mind. Right, so there's a real difference between the nervous system of a child and the mind of a child. And there are other technologies beyond the blockchain that we have to employ. Sorry, I'm walking my dogs. I'm a little out of breath. I took a little spill, and she was kind enough to come back and check on me, which is really nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But anyway, there are other technologies that have been available to us and are continue to be available to us, but we have to begin to access them consciously and deliberately. And that is also critical to achieving what you're talking about, in my opinion. Maybe I'll just leave it there, but I can say that my practice, for example, of Tai Chi has made me vitally aware, crucially aware, that there are these other technologies that are about tapping into the global mind, as well as to just building out the global nervous system. And we need to begin. I'm not saying that everyone becomes a Tai Chi practitioner, but there are many of these technologies. We've talked a lot about music as one. There are many of them, and we have to put everything on the table. We don't have the time to be stick in the muds or close our eyes. We have to begin to recognize the value of each of these layers of technologies and how they fit together in terms of crafting a solution.
You brought up Carl Sagan, speaking about the fragility of our planet, but you can't bring out Carl Sagan without also speaking about the risk of meteors, which is what, every 1,000 years or so we get a big meteor strike on the planet. And I think the odds of being killed by a meteor are less than that of being struck by lightning. So just to put things in perspective a bit. And also, as Greg mentioned before about mycelia and mushrooms playing a big role in forests, I wanted to mention there's a new movie that was just put out by Paul Stamets, who is from Olympia, Washington, and has quite a few books out on mushrooms. And this, he put out both a book and a movie, Fantastic Fungi, How Mushrooms Can Heal, Shift Consciousness, and Save the Planet. And I've heard great things about this movie. It's something I plan to check out in the next week or two. It's in theaters all around.
Very cool. Thanks for that. I'm going to totally check that out.
I don't think the meteor risk is, I mean, that, yeah, those don't come very often. And I think we have technology to divert them from Earth, don't we?
Well, that
Or
requires a whole another kind of coordination to deal with that sort of risk.
Right. But, I mean, so that's a potential problem in the future, right? But the climate crisis is a certain problem now. So I don't know if we can really put them in the same category in terms of things that harm human life or human health or risk
Just
to the...
but in the same way we have coordination among space agencies and
Yes.
tracking centers around the world, we need that same sort of infrastructure set up for monitoring climate change and dealing with the carbon credits or efforts at carbon sequestration to keep score and coordinate around the world.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And actually, I'm not sure if people know this, but I believe it was the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is NASA's, I guess, main office. It's where they oversee all their missions and where they launch everything from in terms of a computer level. Obviously, Cape Canaveral is where they've launched a lot of stuff. But I was there a few months ago, and because I have a friend that works there, and I was reading their mission statement, and actually it's part of their mission statement to help convey all this different data about what's going on around the Earth. And actually, there are several space agencies, but most notably NASA, that really kind of started this because they launched satellites and were able to monitor things and take close pictures of things. And they had these incredibly accurate data sets about moisture and wind and fires and all sorts of stuff that we use today. So you're not far off in thinking that we need to have a system like that, but for the climate. I think that's maybe one of the things that they tried to start. And obviously, that data is used all the time today because it's constantly being taken by satellites and other instruments. But yeah, we do need a system to figure out how we can get ourselves out of this. And I know that Greg is going to say that it needs to be decentralized and not top down. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of this whole thing, is trying to figure out how to coordinate 7.5 billion people to work together without having one central authority. That's another very interesting question.
Well, the satellites you could look at as oracles or sensors providing data, a partial view of the climate of the planet's carbon. And by the way, don't forget Goddard here outside of Washington, D.C., where there's also a lot of NASA coordination. But I think maybe the GOES satellite, if I remember in particular, has a lot of instrumentation which is able to monitor carbon and detect, I think, changes in the composition of crops and different kinds of ground cover, including trees, so that they can score and monitor when there's, if a country was to do a huge tree planting effort, that could be monitored from above. And if you have more than one system out there, you have more than one view, more than one oracle helping you keep score. So it's not just completely top down, one source of truth.
Yeah, more of a global view, the global and local view put into one, which I think is probably what we need. And actually, I mentioned that in an earlier blog that went up on the Archon blog that I wrote. And there's also, by the way, this is the perfect time to mention, I also just wrote a new one, which just went up yesterday. So thank you to Derek for that. But it's all about leadership in the climate crisis, and talks a bit about blockchain as well. But there's a new blog that I just wrote. So if you check the Archon blog, it should be the most recent one because it just went up yesterday. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. I'm going to check that one out. I haven't checked it out yet. Looking forward to that read. Yeah, it's just like the big challenge is, how are we going to coordinate? How as a planet are we going to coordinate? And so much of this is geopolitical, and as disasters continue on, like the horrors we're seeing in Australia right now, there will be governments in denial, and there will be governments who are going to retreat back into themselves and create national fervor in order to build walls. And then there will be some governments who will realize what's going on and start to develop and work together. And it's not going to be a smooth. There's just that's one thing we can guarantee, that this is not going to be smooth. And if we look at the geopolitical events of the last 24 hours, there's a very unfriendly reminder of that.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
is something that is sadly not going to happen without probably some massive suffering.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the question. Is really, how there's already going to be a lot of suffering and warming already baked in. And obviously, over the past several years, there's been an enormous amount of suffering. I mean, if you follow God on Twitter, which I do, the God account is very funny. I highly recommend it. And just yesterday, God tweeted, "There are too many apocalypses to keep track of," which is just exactly what is going on between the flooding in Jakarta and Australia and everything in the Congo, and it just goes on and on. But I think that what we're talking about is we can control, how much more suffering there's going to be, how much longer is this going to happen, and how bad do we want it to get? Because it's already bad, it's already a disaster. And it's really about how much worse it's going to be, because that is the thing that we are in control of. And um, uh, going off of what you mentioned, Daryl, military industrial complex around the world, especially in America. Um, it's been mentioned that there's so much money that we spend on the military, and really what are we doing most of the time is just killing people. That a lot of that energy and money and time could be placed into saving our planet, which would be so much better, and obviously save a lot of lives. And you know um, it's just crazy that we spend so much money that way, but that the entire world spends so much money that way, just given how much carbon all of these tanks and airplanes and all this stuff emits. And I just find it really upsetting, just given the news yesterday. Of course, we're going to see how that goes. But yeah, world peace, that would be a very big step towards climate change being solved, which is something that a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah, because like to me, when I start to get kind of depressed about those kinds of things, which is kind of often, one thing that cheers me up is this video from Jeremy Rifkin about the empathic civilization. Do you know about the empathic civilization and Jeremy Rifkin?
I might. That sounds very familiar to me, but it also might just sound like something I would say. So I'm not sure.
Okay, well, so Jeremy Rifkin, he's like this American kind of futurist, social theorist, political advisor, public speaker guy. And there's this one particular video that I actually posted on Discord that explains the empathic civilization. And I'll just read from some notes that I wrote about it. We are soft-wired with mirror neurons. If I'm observing you, the same neurons light up in me to feel what you're feeling. We are soft-wired for sociability, attention, companionship, and the drive to belong. That's actually one of the things that makes us uniquely human. Our tribes have grown from families to tribes to villages to cities, spurred by the agrarian revolution, leading to the term civilization. From there, it grew to nation states, which has now remained for the last couple thousand years. If we look at this as a continuous expansion, the next stage for our social evolution will lead to an international planetary coordination as a species. This involves a massive shift for humanity, rapid evolutionary acceleration like never before experienced in history. In order to pull this off, we have to transcend political, cultural, and language barriers and begin to coordinate as a planetary species with a clear focus and mission. The whole idea is to build a strong, resilient global system of communication that can keep ticking away if a chunk goes down somewhere in the world. So, if bombs get dropped on the Apple data center spaceship in the desert, we'll lose all our photos. I've thought about that a lot. This whole kind of like movement to the cloud, and um, this idea that all of our stuff is being stored in these very centralized data farms. It's very volatile. And that's another thing that I really like about the whole kind of Archain approach, is that it's peer-to-peer, and we're putting our data on this, and I think that is far more resilient and harkens back to the original DARPANET vision. And I think it's also I think what I was getting at, when there's going to be pockets of the earth that will unfortunately be full of war and torment and bloodshed while we're trying to coordinate. It's just, this isn't going to be a simple, easy thing. And so I think that the sooner we can build the next internet with the same resilience that DARPANET envisioned in the first place, the more chances we are of being able to root around the conflicts that are happening. I swear, Russia and China, and I'm sure the US, have weapons designed to take out the internet in parts of the world. Like last week, Russia just performed an experiment where they shut off the internet and turned on the Russia internet. They're preparing for something like this. So this is just another thing floating around.
Yeah, well, that's very scary. And the something I wrote a book, but something that and you what you're going to do, because the conditions are always impossible. And I think we're seeing a very stark and harrowing example of that now. Like, you've got to save the planet while the whole thing is at war, and all these very difficult things we have to do. But I'm so with you. Yes, we're going to have to coordinate under some very difficult circumstances. And that is just the job of humanity right now. And it's very difficult, but I think it can be done, especially just in light of something else that I found. I forgot I wanted to share it with you guys in the beginning, but that's actually perfect now. I just saw this report from New Year's Eve from the 31st, which I just put in the chat, which is a list of 7 climate disasters that all costed at least $10 billion each. So that is, I think we're getting to a point now where it's going to be very difficult for people to deny what is going on. Of course, in Australia and other places, we still have some difficulty with that. And that's going to be really difficult, which is why everybody has to go and vote. Because remember, all these young climate activists, a lot of them are like 10, 12 years old. So it's really important that people vote. But, I think with this data about how much this is costing us, I think it's going to be very hard for people to deny that taking action, no matter what we do, is going to be cheaper than inaction. Because the inaction is going to be the really expensive part, not just in terms of finances, fiscally, but also just, as Greg mentioned before, in terms of the richness of the things that we lose, that we literally cannot purchase again. Like, there's no way to regrow an Amazon rainforest that's hundreds of millions of years old, or however old it is. You can't buy that. And so that's going to be a very difficult pill for some people who haven't realized that to swallow. But at least in the meantime, we have these very convincing financial reports that really show just how costly not doing anything is. And of course, as David Wallace Wells, one of my climate heroes, a great author, points out, people in California, they continue to build their homes in exactly the same place that they were burned. And a lot of people just are not really learning about how widespread this is and how it's going to come back every year. But I think that now that it's really sad that we're having so many, cataclysmic and super expensive disasters going on, just like God said on Twitter. But I think it's hopefully the silver lining of that is it's going to convince people who have a lot of power and money that doing something is going to be cheaper than not doing something. That's my hope. Hopefully there's not too much more suffering before that connection is made, but I see that as somewhat of a silver lining. I'm not sure if you guys do, but
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, I think that really the solution is going to come from the economic realization that it's actually good business. The whole fourth industrial revolution concept being
yes.
decarbonization. It really literally is. And it's kind of like when I was shopping for a car a while ago, and the real actual price of a car is the full life cycle cost of the car, not the ticket price. So when you factor all that out, electric cars are the cheapest cars to buy. But most people don't think like that. They just think about the ticket price, and they don't really think about how much it's going to cost them in gas in the next 10, 20 years or whatever. And the same thing we have to kind of do with with climate change, like you just said, right? There's the costs of not doing anything, and then there's the economic advantages of doing things, and you put those two things together, and it becomes a very practical, rational decision. Derek actually posted something that he found from the New York Times that's kind of like a bit of a feel-good piece.
Oh, good.
And it's the headline is "No More Phones and Other Tech Predictions for the Next Decade." It's this woman named Kara Swisher, and the very number one first prediction that she makes for the next decade is more investment in tech that addresses climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So she wrote, with all due respect to Greta Thunberg and the efforts of young people across the globe to bring attention to climate change, governments may never agree on how to properly address our lurch towards environmental suicide, which is why it is critically important that tech turn its focus towards creating products that will save us. The amount of investment in green tech remains stubbornly low compared with other tech sectors. Bill Gates and Elon Musk have been making more investments in this area, but they remain the only big names doing so. That's too bad, since I think the world's first trillionaire will be a green tech entrepreneur. There are many
Wow,
areas
that's
to
interesting.
there are many areas to explore, including battery storage, renewables, software, and artificial intelligence to help us understand climate data, the food ecosystem, and even the way we construct our buildings. The most important challenge is finding a way to keep carbon in the ground, and figuring the best way to do that provides a golden opportunity for entrepreneurs.
Wow, that's a fascinating story, and I think it is true that definitely whoever or whomever, if it's a group of people or a bunch of different people, or our chain or whoever it is that's able to help crack this decarbonization economy, I think that's going to be extremely lucrative. But more than money is important that we are able to continue on living, and obviously that we preserve all of these incredible plants and animals in areas that are truly priceless. That's the real prize. Thank you for posting that. And I also just in the chat, I just posted a link to my new blog if anybody wants to read it, because I think it's a great way to start the new year, and I'm hoping that the community really enjoys it. But also, Daryl, because I did write about some of the things that you and I have been talking about with the decarbonization technologies and the opportunity for blockchain and other types of technology to really do well in this new era, in this new industry, which hopefully we've already entered. It's just kind of in its infancy, but I'm hoping that it really takes off. And that was one of the things that I wrote about. So anyway, if anybody wants to check it out, it's there. But that name Kara Swisher is very familiar to me. I wonder if I follow her or maybe seen some other of her writings or something, but that's a fantastic piece. I'm gonna where did you find that? Were you just on the New York Times just hanging out, or?
No, it was Derek. Derek sent me the
Oh,
link.
Derek found it, right? But that's what you
Yep.
said. Yeah, Derek. Well, that's fascinating. Trillionaire. I'm not sure if the planet can handle any trillionaires, because the billionaires have done quite a number already. But I think that she is right, though, that decarbonization is going to be enormously lucrative. Of course, it's only going to work if we understand what the true riches of the world are, and that they're not in finances, but in protecting our, ability to live, as I said. So,
Well, I think
that's
it's only
really
going to happen if it does become the next economy. We can't battle that, so it has to be that. So I think that there's that guy, Johan Galtung. He's a peace negotiator, and he has this kind of theory about the rise and fall of empires, and how all empires rose and fell around an energy source. So, we
Oh,
look
yeah,
at
sure.
the Romans and the Egyptians, their energy source was humans. You look at the Dutch, their energy source was wind. You look at the rise of the British Empire, and that energy source was coal and the Industrial Revolution. Then you look at the United States, that energy source was oil. And we're now reaching the end of that. It's had this kind of boom in the last few years due to fracking, but we're reaching the end of that power era for the United States. So the next energy source needs to be international. It needs to be the first global empire, so to speak. And the next energy source is the sun. The renewable energy. So, that it's just practical. That's where we are. So if you want to make a lot of money, get into this. It's where it's going, and it'll also help save the planet.
Minor detail.
And that's why, like, to me, when we're searching for investors right now at Archain, it makes perfect sense that we're focused on this. I think we're going to be ahead of the curve by pouring our energy into climate change, and finding solutions, because that's literally where the next economy is going.
Yeah, and I love that you added as a little detail that we get to survive. I love that.
Yeah, a little added bonus.
Yeah, I just think that is such a funny thing that is often overlooked, and people say, oh, and the tree huggers this and the activists that, and it's all become so granola, and people are like, what in the hell does this have to do with me? But it's like, that's why I always say, and why I wrote in my blog, if you're a human being living on planet Earth, the climate crisis is in your lane. You cannot avoid it. You cannot help it. It will affect you. It will affect people that you know. It will affect everything. And it already is affecting everything. And I love that. It's all about the financial benefits, but we always forget about the fact that we actually need to live. And it just also goes to the heart of how much human beings, not just Americans, and of course you're Canadian, so I can't even say that, but how much regular people anywhere around the world, regardless of their profession, and even I've done this too, we just totally take for granted the fact that we have a habitable planet to live on that has air and water and resources and food and the right amount of heat and cold, but not too much in either direction, and all this stuff. And that we can run businesses and schools and governments and all these things that we can do on planet Earth. And similarly, I think if you want to get a little more spiritual about it, there are definitely some philosophers who talk about how we also take advantage of our bodies, or not take advantage of them, but we take them for granted, and we don't think about the fact that, oh yeah, I can breathe with this thing and I can eat with it, and it allows me to walk and, digests my food and, houses my brain and my heart and all these things. And I think one really big piece of this is going to be people not taking the planet for granted, and not seeing the fact that we get to survive as an afterthought. Of course, that should be the main thing. But we've just gotten so far away from the things that really matter that now we're having to use financial arguments in order to avoid extinction as a species, which I just find hysterical. And also,
why do you find that
crazy.
hysterical? I don't understand.
Well, that we're talking about money
you do realize that 70% of the entire world's population lives on $10 a day?
Yes, I realize that.
Okay, well, I mean, some people would take offense to what you're saying, because some people don't have money, right?
Well, what I'm saying is
without
that
poverty, I don't think anything is going to change, to be honest.
completely. Well, I mean, obviously, it's not usually poor people who are taking the earth for granted, because usually they're a lot more intimately connected with the environment, and they often suffer the effects of the climate crisis much sooner and with a lot less aid than other, richer nations and richer people. So, of course, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I do think it's a bit crazy that we have to say, oh, well, we're only going to survive if it's financially the right thing to do, rather than just saying, well, how can we make the human race survive? Do you know what I mean? Just the fact that it's always about money first, because we can't spend money when we're dead. We can't, you know what I mean? And so life should be the precious thing, regardless of how much money you make. And also regarding poor people or people that have less money, when we do solve the climate crisis, those people are going to be uplifted too, because farming is going to do better, and irrigation is going to be better, all these things, because when the climate is collapsing, those people feel it first. So anyway, that was my comment about that, but maybe somebody can back me up on how absurd it is. But maybe I'm the only one that thinks it's absurd, that the only reason we should save human beings is to make money. I think that's a pretty funny thing that we have to convince people of.
Well, the way that I kind of look at money is kind of inspired by when I used to work at Mountain Equipment Co-op in the warehouse, packing sleeping bags for a living. There was a lot of Chinese that I worked with. It was about 50-50. So I got to make a lot of good friends, Chinese friends. And I'll never forget this one conversation I had with this one fellow who kind of explained to me the Chinese word for money. And he said, the Chinese word for money, we think of money so differently from you Canadians. And I'm like, how? And he's like, well, the Chinese word for money means flow. And I really had to kind of stop and think about that for a while. And he kind of went on to explain that really what money is a flow. And when economies do well, it's when the people get energized about doing things. When the middle class is strong, it's because people are kind of working towards something. Like the old, the New Deal was, or if you look at, there's this book called The Entrepreneurial State that kind of explains how, governments can actually help spur on the economy by kind of like getting people going with the flow of things. So that's kind of what I think about when I'm thinking about how money is going to play a role in the future of our survival, is when we start to realize that we all need to start pulling up our socks and start working towards this common need. And so that's kind of the way I look at it.
But by the way, Daryl, that's exactly why Archain's the resource that allows the network to compute is called phlogiston, because I knew that people would shorten it to flow.
Oh yeah, right. Awesome. I never made that connection before.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I actually hadn't thought of that either. I can't believe I didn't think of that. But
And that's what
awesome.
happens, right? All the developers call it flow rather than say phlogiston.
Right.
Well, that's the Chinese word for money.
Exactly. No, yeah, exactly. Precisely that.
It's almost as if you thought about this before you did it. It's incredible, Greg. It's like you thought it through. I don't know. It's a mysterious feeling I have. Yeah. Well, that's so interesting. You learn something new every day. And so I guess if the community, when they hear this, they might not know that the Chinese, whoever is not Chinese, they might not know that. But thank you for teaching me a Chinese word, Daryl.
I wish I knew what the word was. I can't remember what he told me.
We should check with our Chinese community and see if this is accurate.
Yes,
Yeah,
we do
yeah.
need to do that.
I'd like to hear that. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, everybody who participated today, and I'm looking forward to having some more guests in the future. Daryl and I are working very hard. We've made a list of some people that we think would be great to have on, and we might have to ramp up to that, but we're also, I'll just say it now, if there's anybody in the community that would like to join us on this call, you can email climate@archain.coop, and you can let us know if you'd like to join as a guest on the call, and you can also email us a few topics that you might have in mind that you'd like to talk about. So anybody in the community, if they want to, they can join us, and we would love to have some more guests. So we're going to work on that. And I think that's going to go a long way toward getting this conversation out toward lots more people in the future, because it's such a good conversation and such an important conversation. And I think adding guests will only enrich it even more. So that's what we're working on.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's going to be great. So anyway, we have 2 minutes left. So thank you, everyone. This was awesome.
Indeed. Thank you. Happy New Year to all.
Happy New Year, everybody.